Spring break was supposed to be an escape. No overpacked beaches, no drunk college kids shouting over bad music. Just me, Nate, Sam, and Liv camping on a quiet Florida beach away from everything. No responsibilities, no stress. Just the ocean, a bonfire, and a few beers under the stars. That was the plan, anyway. We got there later than we meant to. The sun was already sinking, burning the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. By the time we parked and started hauling our gear toward the dunes, I could already feel it, this strange, heavy quiet. I'd expected at least a few other people. A couple of fishermen setting up for the night, maybe another group of campers, someone walking the shoreline. But there was nothing, just miles of empty sand stretching in both directions, the waves rolling in like a slow, steady heartbeat. I told myself it was a good thing. We wanted seclusion, right? But I could tell the others felt it too. Liv kept glancing around like she expected someone to step out of the dunes. Sam had that tense silence he got when something put him on edge. Then there was the SUV. At first it was nothing, just a beat-up old thing driving along the narrow access road that ran parallel to the beach. People drove those roads all the time, probably looking for a spot to fish or just killing time. But when it passed us again, slow, deliberate, I started to feel it in my gut. The third time I was sure. I didn't see the driver's face, but I could feel their eyes on us. Watching. I don't know what I expected when the SUV rolled up again, but I knew it wasn't good. No one stops in a place like this unless they have a reason. This wasn't some lost tourist or a friendly local checking in. This was deliberate. The engine cut off, and for a few seconds nothing happened. The door creaked open and then he stepped out. Something about him felt wrong. Not just the way he looked, tall, wiry, his clothes hanging loose like they didn't quite fit, but the way he moved. Too stiff, like his limbs weren't working the way they should. He had a limp, but it wasn't natural. It was more like someone trying to remember how to walk. I didn't say anything at first. None of us did. I think we were all waiting for some kind of normal explanation. Maybe a lost fisherman. Maybe someone checking if we had supplies. Instead, he just stood there, looking at us. Then he said it. "You're on my land." His voice was slurred, just a little off. The words hung in the air too long, and something about them made my stomach drop. There were no fences, no signs, just open sand stretching for miles. This wasn't his land. Before I could even think of what to say, he moved. Fast, his hand flashed, and suddenly there was a knife. I barely had time to process it before I heard the growl. My dog was already in the air before I could even yell. Teeth sank into the guy's arm, twisting, forcing the knife loose. He hit the ground hard, screaming. I shouted for my dog to back off, afraid the guy would get another hit in, but the damage was done. He scrambled away, clutching his arm, and dragged himself into the SUV. The way he drove off still haunts me, not like he was panicked, not like he was hurt, more like he was regrouping. We should have left immediately. I see that now, but in the moment it didn't feel that simple. The air felt different after the guy left. He was gone, but it didn't feel like we were safer. If anything, it felt worse. Like the silence had gotten heavier, pressing in from all sides. Like something was waiting. None of us said much at first. We just stood there, listening. For what, I don't know. An engine in the distance, footsteps in the sand. Something, anything. Liv was the first to break the silence. "He's not done." We all knew she was right. The way he had driven off, too controlled, too steady, wasn't someone running away. It was someone figuring out their next move. Leaving seemed obvious, but I kept hesitating, carrying everything back in the dark. It made me uneasy. It meant walking through open space with nothing to hide behind, and that road running alongside us the entire way. If he was out there, we'd be completely exposed. But staying, that felt worse. So we called the cops, even though I didn't think it would do anything. What were we even going to tell them? That some guy with a knife had threatened us on a public beach. That we felt like he was coming back. They said they'd send someone. That didn't make me feel better. By the time they got close, we had packed everything up and started walking. The trek back to the car felt slow, like every step was dragging through something heavier than sand. I kept telling myself it was fine, that we'd be in the car soon. But that nagging feeling never left. The walk back felt longer than it should have. Every step felt slower, like the sand was pulling at our feet. Every sound was too loud. The distant crash of waves, the wind shifting through the dunes, the rustling of something unseen. Shadows stretched too long in the moonlight, warping into shapes that didn't seem right. I kept checking behind us. Nothing was there, but that didn't mean we weren't being watched. Seeing the car should have been a relief. It wasn't. The first thing I noticed was the sand disturbed, messy, wrong. Too many footprints, circling, pacing, not ours. We hadn't walked around the car like that. I felt it before I even saw it. The back door just slightly open, just enough to be noticeable. And I knew for a fact we had locked it before we left. I stopped. The others did too. No one said a word, but I could feel it. The same realization hitting all of us at once. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. Inside, something felt off. A smell, faint, musty, like sweat and damp fabric. The kind of scent a person leaves behind when they sit somewhere too long. I didn't want to breathe it in. And then I saw it. Something small, something that hadn't been there before. A torn strip of fabric caught on the seatbelt. Or maybe a single muddy handprint smeared near the dashboard. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. The SUV was gone, but I still felt like we weren't alone. The cop noticed before I did. I was too focused on the car itself, on the door, on the feeling that something was wrong to pay attention to the tires. But then he pointed, and I saw it, slashed. Not just a quick jab, not a single puncture. Whoever did it had taken their time. Deep, deliberate cuts, careful enough to make sure I wasn't going anywhere. Not rushed, not panicked, just intentional. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring. I think my brain was still trying to make sense of it, like maybe there was some other explanation, some stupid prank, some random act of vandalism. But there wasn't. The cop did a full check. Trunk, seats, under the car. Nothing was missing. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. If anything, it made it worse, because whoever had been there hadn't been trying to steal anything. They weren't looking for money or gear or anything we left behind. They had just been inside, sitting, waiting, leaving behind footprints in the sand, a door cracked open, and the kind of unease that settles in your stomach and never quite leaves. The cop was nice enough, helped as much as he could, but what could he really do? No suspects, no real crime, just a weird night with no answers. Just another story for some report that no one would ever follow up on. Even now I keep thinking about that door. About the fact that someone had been inside my car, and about what might have happened if we had gotten back just a little later. There's something about spring break that stirs up a strange kind of guilt in me, not the obvious kind. Not the kind that comes from being too harsh on my kid when he asked me for money for his own trip, or the kind that makes me second guess whether I should have just let it slide. No, it's something deeper. Something I don't like thinking about. Maybe it's because I see so much of myself in him, the same blind excitement, the same reckless certainty that nothing bad can touch you when you're that young. He wants to go off with his friends, waste time and money on fleeting moments that won't mean much in a decade. I get it. I did the same thing. And yet when he asked, I didn't just feel irritated. I felt off, like something old had been shaken loose. It took me a while to figure out what. But now I can't stop thinking about it. It was my junior year. I was dating a girl named Elena. We weren't serious, but at the time everything felt significant. She convinced me to go with her to Puerto Rico instead of heading home like I usually did. Said she wanted me to meet her family, see where she grew up. It felt like the right kind of adventure, sun, beaches, something new. I said yes without hesitation. I hadn't thought about that trip in years. Not really. But now it's clawing its way back into my head. And the more I remember, the more I realize there was something wrong about it. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that made sense to me at the time. But now I feel like I missed something. Like there was something I wasn't supposed to forget. And I'm starting to wonder if I ever really left it behind. San Felipe was everything Elena had described. Loud, sprawling, full of relatives who treated me like I was one of them before I even had a chance to earn it. It was the kind of warmth that should have made me feel at ease, but I was constantly aware of how out of place I was. I laughed when I was supposed to, nodded when I didn't understand. It was fun, mostly. Exhausting, definitely. But what I remember most clearly isn't the big family dinners or the beaches. It's the damn hike. Elena had been fixated on this one particular trail in the Verde National Preserve. I didn't know much about it, only that she talked about it like it was some kind of sacred experience, better than anything else we could possibly do. When we got there, though, we hit a problem. The trail was closed, blocked off. Some flimsy wooden sign warned of maintenance or flooding or something, but she wasn't having it. I remember how quickly the frustration flickered across her face, like someone had personally ruined her entire trip. I tried to reason with her, pointed out that there were other trails, but she wouldn't hear it. Nothing else would compare, she said. And just like that, the decision was made. It didn't take much. Just one look between us, that unspoken agreement that rules were more like suggestions. We checked the area, ducked past the barriers, and started up the path. I remember thinking how cool it was that we had the place to ourselves. No crowds, no noise, just the sound of our footsteps on damp earth. It should have felt off. The air was too thick. The overgrown plants clawed at our clothes, and everything smelled wrong, like decay just beneath the surface. But back then, it just felt like an adventure. For a while, it had been perfect. The kind of quiet that doesn't exist in places like this. No distant chatter from other hikers, no rustling of footsteps ahead or behind. Just us, surrounded by towering trees and thick, tangled green. Every now and then, I'd catch Elena glancing back at me, grinning like she'd won something. Like sneaking onto the trail had made this place ours. The deeper we went, the more I started to believe it. Then she stopped. Not the kind of stop where you slow down to look at something interesting, but the kind where your whole body seizes up, like it's just hit a wall. I barely had time to register it before she staggered back, almost colliding into me. "Elena?" She didn't answer, just stared at the ground a few feet ahead, shoulders drawn up so tight I could see the tension in her neck. My first thought was a snake. I stepped around her, ready to spook it off the path, but then I saw it. Not a snake, something small sprawled out unnaturally. A ferret? No, a weasel. I took a step closer, but it was wrong. Too big. The fur was thick, coarse. The body curled slightly like it had been mid-movement when its head was gone. Not torn, not chewed, just gone. The cut was straight, surgical, too clean for an animal attack. Too deliberate. I swallowed hard. The body hadn't started to smell yet. That meant it hadn't been here long. Someone had done this. Recently, maybe minutes before we arrived. For the first time since we'd stepped onto the trail, the quiet didn't feel like something we'd stolen. It felt like something waiting, watching. We should have left. That's the part that sticks with me the most. That's the part that itches at the back of my brain whenever I think about this. We should have turned around the second we saw that thing, but we didn't. We kept going, like idiots. Or maybe we were just trying to shake it off, like brushing off a bad dream before it settles in too deep. Elena set the pace, fast and focused, like moving forward could erase what we'd just seen. I followed because what else was I supposed to do? At some point, though, the trail didn't look right anymore. Not different. Exactly. Not enough to make me stop outright, but it felt deeper. Like the trees were leaning in more than he had before, like the air had thickened around us. I started second-guessing. Had we veered off? Maybe taken some side path without realizing? I didn't remember seeing any splits in the trail, but then again I hadn't been looking for them. Elena, though, she was sure. She didn't hesitate, just kept walking, muttering something about how she knew this was the right way. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something was wrong. I kept thinking about that carcass, about how fresh it had been, how whoever left it there might still be close. Then we turned back, and that's when I swear, the trail had shifted, just a little, just enough to make me doubt myself. And when we reached the spot where the body had been, it was gone. But in its place, something else. Something hanging. I know it wasn't there before. It couldn't have been, but it was there now. It was hanging, the marten, or whatever the hell it had been, strung up by twine, dangling like some kind of offering. The fur was still slick with something, but it wasn't blood, not exactly. Off-colored, thick, clinging to the strands of fur like tar. It turned slightly in the breeze, slow and deliberate, like something had just stopped pushing it. Elena made a sound, sharp, guttural, a real instinctual kind of fear, not the kind you can talk yourself out of. Then she ran. I barely had time to react. She was already moving, feet pounding against the dirt, breath ragged. She wasn't thinking, she wasn't looking. She just wanted to be anywhere but there. I hesitated, just for a second, a stupid, useless second. But I needed to see. I needed to be sure. That's when I heard it. Not from her, not from me, from somewhere else. A scream, but not really a scream. Not an animal, not a person. It had too much depth, like it came from somewhere bigger, wider, like it wasn't shaped for a human throat. It stretched, warped, vibrating through the trees, bending the air around it. It hit me like a wave, like a pressure drop before a storm. I ran. I don't remember making the choice. I don't remember turning. I just ran. Elena was ahead, her footsteps wild, unsteady. I was chasing her, following without thinking. But the whole time, I could feel the sound pressing in around me. I've replayed that moment so many times, more than I want to admit. Every time I ask myself the same thing. Was it an echo, or was it right behind us? We made it back. At some point, the trees broke, the trail widened, and the dirt gave way to gravel. The parking lot. The world. The normal world, where things made sense. And someone was waiting. A man, uniformed, arms crossed. A park worker. Pissed off. I barely remember what he said. Something about closed trails, about safety, about people like us ruining things for everyone. He had this practiced kind of irritation, the kind you use when you're used to dealing with dumb college kids who think rules don't apply to them. But that wasn't the part that mattered. The part that mattered was that he had been out there. Somewhere. At some point, he had been looking for us. And he hadn't heard a thing. We told him what happened. We tried, at least. I don't know how much of it made sense. How much of it even sounded believable. He listened, face unreadable, then sighed and made a call. The police came. Statements were taken. It all became a process, a blur of paperwork and waiting. I barely remember it. Except for Elena. She shut down completely, barely spoke, barely looked at me. At some point, we got in the car and we drove. That was it. No real explanation, no conclusion, no answers, and maybe that should have been enough. I kept checking the news afterward, waiting for something, an article, a mention, anything. But there was nothing. No missing hikers, no reports of weird sounds, nothing about the thing we saw hanging, or the thing that screamed, or the wrongness in the air that day. It was like it never happened, and I guess that should have been comforting. But it wasn't, because the more I think about it, the more something feels off. Did we actually get lost, or did something let us go? It was spring break, 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Red Crest Bay for the weekend. Neither of us had been there before, but it was cheap, warm, and just far enough from home to feel like an escape. We landed late Thursday, too late to do anything except drop our bags at the rental and head straight to the bars. The first night was exactly what I expected. Crowds of drunk college kids, music blasting from every corner, the kind of reckless energy that made you feel invincible. The drinks were expensive. The people were loud, and the streets felt alive in a way that made it easy to forget everything else. We hopped from one place to the next, taking shots with strangers, stumbling back to our rental in the early hours of the morning, laughing at nothing. But now, when I think about that trip, I don't remember the fun parts first. I don't remember the beach, or the music, or the way everything felt weightless in those first few hours. Instead, I feel something heavy in my stomach. Something that lingers no matter how much time passes. It's not just a bad hangover or some vague feeling of regret, it's something else. Like I missed something. like I ignored something I shouldn't have. And the more I think about it, the more it scares me, because I can't shake the feeling that we got lucky, that whatever happened that weekend, whatever we walked away from, it could have ended very differently. The next afternoon, we did what everyone else was doing, claimed a spot on the beach, stretched out our towels, and let the sun burn away the hangover from the night before. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen, the sound of waves barely cutting through the constant noise of music, shouting, and too loud laughter. Spring breakers in every direction, moving in predictable patterns, groups of guys making their rounds, stopping at every cluster of girls, testing their luck before moving on. Most of them were easy to brush off. Drunk, overeager, running through the same tired lines, we barely looked up from our towels. But then there was Chris. He wasn't like the others. No awkward small talk, no forced charm, just easy confidence, like he already knew how the conversation would go before he even opened his mouth. He introduced himself, asked what we were doing that night. He wasn't pushy, wasn't trying too hard, and something about that made me let my guard down. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without really thinking, then he just left. Didn't linger, didn't flirt more, didn't scan the crowd for other options, just walked away staring at his phone, like he'd already gotten what he came for. At the time, I didn't think much of it. If anything, it felt like a good sign. A guy who wasn't desperate, who didn't treat the beach like a numbers game. But now, looking back, I can't figure out why he only wanted mine. Chris texted me that evening, quick response, casual but direct. He and his friend Nate were around and didn't have plans yet. Did we want to meet up? It felt easy, natural, so we invited them over to pregame at our rental before heading out. They showed up just after 9, carrying their own drinks, laughing like they'd already had a few. Nothing felt off. If anything, they blended right in. Chris had that same effortless charm from the beach. Nate was a little louder, a little more playful, but nothing that set off alarms. We drank in the backyard, music low, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. It felt like any other spring break night. Then we got to the bar, and everything blurred. Too many flashing lights, too many bodies pressed together, too many rounds of shots I don't remember agreeing to. Everything moved fast, pieces slipping away even as they happened. I remember Ryan disappearing with Nate, the two of them laughing, vanishing into the crowd. I remember Chris keeping close, his presence steady at my side. And I remember at some point coming back from the bathroom and seeing him hunched over the bar, his body too still, his focus locked on something in front of him. My drink, his hand near the rim, his head tilted slightly, like he was doing something just out of sight. For a second I froze. Had I imagined it? Had I just caught him at a weird angle, misread something innocent? The music pulsed around me, people shoved past, and Chris straightened up like nothing had happened. But something inside me was already telling me to leave. I didn't decide to leave the bar. Not in a conscious, rational way. 1 second, I was standing there, trying to shake off the unease crawling up my spine. The next, I was pushing through the crowd, moving toward the exit like something was pulling me. Outside, the night air hit me hard, cutting through the haze but not clearing it. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, trying Ryan again. No answer. I texted instead. "Where are you?" Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Then my phone buzzed, still with Nate. Relief, but not really. Something about it didn't sit right. Ryan was a fast texter, but this was off. Too clipped. Too flat. Before I could even process it, another message came. Outside the rental. I stopped walking, stared at the screen. That didn't make sense. It was too soon for her to be back. Even if she'd left before me, she would have needed time to get there. And why wasn't she picking up my calls? I typed, "You good?" 3 dots appeared, paused, disappeared. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was too drunk to trust my own instincts. Maybe she was just tired, done with the night, not in the mood to talk. But deep down, something in me already knew. I wasn't texting Ryan anymore. The walk back to the rental felt longer than it should have, every step dragging under the weight of something I couldn't name. My phone buzzed again. "You up?" That wasn't right. That wasn't how Ryan texted. I hesitated, then typed, "Yeah, where are you?" "Outside." "Open the door." The rental was still a block away. My stomach tightened. I picked up my pace. Another message, "Hurry, someone's coming." That made me stop cold. The rental came into view. It looked empty, untouched. No sign of Ryan, no sign of anyone. I reached the back door, my hands clammy as I gripped the handle. The keypad lock beeped. Once, twice. Someone was already trying to get in. The knob twisted. My breath caught in my throat. I called Ryan's phone, but it rang and rang. No answer. Another text instead. "Open the door." I pressed my forehead against the door, heart pounding. "Ryan?" My voice barely carried. Silence. I checked the peephole at the front. The porch light flickered, barely catching movement, a shadow. Someone just out of sight. I should have opened the door. If it was Ryan, she needed help. But if it wasn't, the keypad beeped again. Another failed attempt. Then silence. I wasn't sure which was worse. I backed away from the back door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air inside the rental felt too thick, like it was pressing down on me. I needed to see, needed to know. My feet barely made a sound as I crept to the front door, every step dragging like my body already knew what I'd find. The peephole was small, but it was enough. Chris, not knocking, not calling out, just standing there just off to the side, barely visible in the distorted glass. He wasn't shifting his weight or fidgeting like someone waiting. He was still, too still. My phone buzzed in my hand. I already knew what it would say before I looked. "Open the door." Something cold crawled up my spine. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could reply, say something. But what? Chris didn't move. He just waited. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stay still, to be silent. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some way to rationalize it. Maybe he was checking on me. Maybe I was overreacting. But I wasn't drunk anymore. My thoughts were clearing, and the more I replayed everything, the drinks, the weird texts, the silence outside, the more I knew. This wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, after what felt like forever, Chris shifted, just slightly, like he was checking something. Then he was gone. The police found Ryan a few blocks away, dazed, barely able to piece together what had happened. She couldn't remember much, just that at some point, everything went black. When they brought her back, I wanted to shake her, scream at her, ask her 1,000 questions. But she wasn't herself. Her eyes were empty, distant, like she had seen something she couldn't even describe. She didn't speak much, just kept muttering how everything was a blur. I asked about her phone. It was gone. They found it later, tossed into the rental's pool like it had never mattered. They said it was probably dropped during the commotion, but it felt off, too deliberate. The police were useless. The officer who spoke to me took the report, asked some questions, and promised they'd look into it. But I knew better. I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't care. The case was just another notch in their belt. That was it. No follow-up, no answers. The trip was over before it even began, and when we finally managed to book early flights out, I felt nothing but exhaustion. The kind that sat heavy in my chest, like the whole experience was just a blur of bad choices and bad people. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who Chris really was or what he was after. I don't know if Ryan was targeted, or if we were both just in the wrong place at the wrong time. All I know is that I'm never going back to Red Crest Bay. Never again. I can still feel the weight of it, like it's stuck under my skin, and maybe that's the most unsettling part. I'll never know what really happened. Spring break was supposed to be an escape. Nothing fancy, nothing wild, just a break from the same old routine. James and I weren't like the other spring breakers flocking to Cancun or Miami. We didn't have the money for that. Honestly, we barely had enough to get out of town at all. So when we found a dirt-cheap Airbnb in Savannah, it felt like a no-brainer. 5 nights, a change of scenery, and a break from college stress. That was the plan. Simple. I remember the drive down, windows rolled down, music blasting, the kind of excitement that only comes from being young and on the move. But even then, something about this trip felt off. Not in a dramatic horror movie kind of way. Just a vague unease, like the feeling you get when you forget something important but can't remember what. I ignored it. The Airbnb itself was nothing special. A tiny rental on a quiet street, sandwiched between two rundown houses. It wasn't sketchy, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. The kind of place you'd scroll past if you had better options. The host barely communicated. The check-in instructions were weirdly vague, and the key lockbox stuck when I tried to open it. Small things. Things I brushed off. That first night, James crashed almost immediately. I lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the house settling. I don't know what I was waiting for. Nothing happened. Nothing was wrong. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe... The cafe was one of those places that looked old but was probably designed that way on purpose. Exposed brick, dim lighting, indie music humming just loud enough to make conversations feel private. James and I stumbled in sometime that afternoon just looking for coffee, maybe something to eat. Nothing special. Just another stop. They were running some kind of giveaway. A free brunch for a lucky winner. The kind of thing no one really wins, but everyone enters anyway. We wrote down our names and numbers without thinking. It was automatic, like signing a receipt. I don't even remember reading the fine print. I doubt there was any. The guy behind the counter, mid-30s, maybe older, was too interested. Not in a way that screamed creepy, but in a way that didn't feel right either. He asked the usual questions. Where we were from. How long we were in town, what places we'd been to so far. Normal small talk. But the way he listened was too focused, like he was filing everything away. I remember thinking he was just bored, maybe desperate to make conversation during a slow shift. At the time, it didn't feel like anything. If anything, James and I laughed about it later, joked that the guy probably just wanted to seem friendly for tips. But looking back, I think that was the moment it started. The moment something shifted, even if I didn't know it yet. Because if I had been paying attention, if I had really looked at him, maybe I would have noticed the way he watched us leave. It was mid-afternoon, the kind of lazy part of the day when the sun is too bright, and the air feels thick from all the fried food and ocean breeze. James and I had found this little seafood shack, one of those spots that looked like a tourist trap, but had just enough wear and tear to feel real. Fried shrimp, hush puppies, sweet tea, the kind of meal that should have been comforting. My phone buzzed. I barely glanced at it at first. Unknown number. Just one word, hey. I didn't think much of it. Probably spam. I locked my phone and kept eating. A few minutes later, another buzz. This time 2 words. Look outside. I remember the way my stomach tensed before I even processed why. I looked up, then toward the window beside our table, just the street outside. People walking, cars rolling by, the usual hum of a city moving. No one staring, no one standing still, no one out of place. I showed James, half laughing, like I was trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a prank. Maybe some girl from campus messing with me. Maybe a wrong number with weird timing. I told myself that, but it sat wrong, because the thing is, random texts happen, spam happens. But the moment I saw those words, look outside, I wanted to look, and whoever sent it, they knew I would. The messages didn't stop. At first, they were spaced out just enough to make me second-guess things, like whoever was sending them wanted to give me time to breathe, just so they could tighten the noose again. But the worst one, the one that made everything snap into focus, it was just my name, Julian. Nothing else. No question. No explanation. Just that. I felt sick. Not scared yet. Just off balance, like the ground wasn't solid under me anymore. I turned my phone toward James, and the moment he read it, his face changed. His whole posture stiffened, like something had just clicked in his head. The cafe, he said. I didn't get it at first. He had to say it again, a little more urgent this time. The cafe, the giveaway, the guy behind the counter. I felt a slow, creeping realization settle in my chest. No proof it was connected. Could have been a coincidence. Could have been someone from campus messing with me after all. Could have been anything. but it made too much sense. Our names, our numbers, we hadn't given them out to anyone else here. That was the only time. And now someone knew my name. We tried to shake it off, pretend it was nothing. James suggested we go somewhere packed, somewhere loud, somewhere with too much noise and too many people for paranoia to settle in. A rooftop bar felt like the right call. One of those places where the music is just a little too loud and the crowd is just drunk enough to blur together. A few drinks helped. Not a lot, but enough to make it all feel distant. Maybe we had overreacted. Maybe the texts were some dumb prank that we were letting get under our skin. And then my phone buzzed. "That's a nice blue hoodie." I went completely still, because I was wearing a blue hoodie, and I was the only one wearing blue. I felt my pulse hammering as I scanned the crowd. Too many people, too many moving bodies, laughing, drinking, shouting, no one looking at me. Or maybe they were. Maybe I just wasn't seeing it. James saw my face and didn't even ask. He just nodded once, silent understanding. We left without finishing our drinks, because this wasn't random. Not anymore. Back at the Airbnb, we didn't talk much. Neither of us wanted to be the first to say it out loud, but we weren't going out again. Not that night. Maybe not for the rest of the trip. We ordered food instead. Something simple. Some burger place a few blocks away. I had my delivery settings on leave at door, always had, ever since a weird Uber Eats experience months ago that I still didn't like thinking about. The estimated wait time dragged. Every little noise outside made me glance at the door. It felt ridiculous, being this on edge. But after everything else, how could I not be? Finally a knock, not the notification. Not the usual soft thump of a bag hitting the porch. An actual deliberate knock. I checked my phone. No photo, just "Your order has arrived." A sick, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I moved slowly, quietly to the peephole. A guy in a hoodie stood there, holding our food. Just standing, not checking his phone, not moving, just waiting. And then after a long, awful pause, "Julian," my breath caught in my throat. I didn't answer, didn't move. Then another knock, harder this time. The door handle rattled, and he said it again. Louder, "Julian." James moved fast. Faster than me. I was still frozen by the door, still holding my breath while he pulled out his phone and dialed. He didn't even speak. Just held it to his ear, silent, letting them hear. The knocking didn't stop. It got worse. More urgent. A shift from patience to frustration. The handle jerked harder. The door shook under his weight. And then nothing. Silence. A beat, two, then footsteps, fast, fading, then sirens. The knock at the door was gone, but now the noise was everywhere. Tires screeching, voices shouting, the crunch of gravel under running feet. I crept to the window, barely breathing, and saw it all happen. Two cops. A guy in a hoodie, the food bag hitting the ground. The takedown was fast, too fast to process. They had him in cuffs before I could even make out his face. We stayed inside. Didn't move until an officer knocked. An actual cop this time, badge out, voice steady. We told them everything. The texts, the cafe, the giveaway. It was him, the guy behind the counter. The one who asked too many questions. He'd taken photos of the entries, had every number, every name, and he had a record. They wouldn't say for what, just that it was bad. We were safe now, apparently. But it didn't feel like it, because all I kept thinking about was the what-ifs. What if I had answered the door? What if I had ignored the locks, even for a second? What if James hadn't called? What if the cops had been slower? I didn't feel relieved. I felt sick.